Once defined by dunes and drought, the UAE is now battling floods. Torrential rains have swamped streets and skylines.
The ancient texts are clear. When a civilization chases gold, rejects God, and refuses every warning, the water comes. It happened to Noah's generation. It happened to Pharaoh's Egypt. It happened to cities that no longer exist because they were wiped from the face of the earth. And on one single night in April 2024, it happened to Dubai, the city with the tallest building on earth, the city with islands built by human hands in the middle of the ocean, the city that genuinely believed it had conquered nature itself, consumed, swallowed, gone. And if you think this is only about Dubai, you have not been paying attention. Dubai is not supposed to flood. That is not an opinion. That is a geographical fact. This city sits in the middle of one of the driest regions on the entire planet, the Arabian Desert, a place where the sun beats down so hard that the air itself feels like it is on fire, a place where the average rainfall for an entire year is less than 4 inches. To put that in perspective, parts of the American Midwest get 4 inches of rain in a single week. Dubai gets that in a year, sometimes less. So when the clouds started gathering on that April morning in 2024, nobody panicked, nobody ran, nobody prepared, because it never rains in Dubai. Except this time, it did. And not just rain. What fell from that sky was something that meteorologists would later struggle to find words for. Within hours, over a year's worth of rainfall crashed down onto the city in a single event. Streets that had been packed with luxury cars and tourists just hours before were completely submerged. Water rushed into shopping malls. Hotels flooded. The airport, one of the busiest airports on the entire planet, ground to a complete halt. Flights canceled. Roads impassable. The city paralyzed. But here is what made this different from any ordinary flood. Dubai was not caught off guard because it lacked technology. This is a city that air conditions its outdoor spaces, a city that built artificial islands visible from space, a city that imports sand to build skyscrapers in a desert, a city with billions of dollars in infrastructure designed to control and conquer the natural world. And in less than 24 hours, nature won. The drainage systems, built for desert conditions, simply could not process what was falling from the sky. Water had nowhere to go. It collected in tunnels, swallowed underpasses, and turned the famous Sheikh Zayed Road into a river. Residents who had never owned rain boots in their lives were wading through chest-deep water to reach safety. Think about that image for a moment. One of the wealthiest cities in the world, home to more gold per square mile than almost anywhere else on Earth. A place where billionaires park their supercars in underground garages. And those same garages became swimming pools overnight. Now stop and ask yourself a question. What are the chances? What are the actual statistical chances that a city built in the world's oldest and driest desert receives more than a year's worth of rainfall in a single day? Scientists put the probability at roughly once every 100 years. Once every 100 years. But was this really just bad weather? Or was something else happening? Because here is what the weather reports did not mention. And they did not mention that this same pattern, sudden, catastrophic, statistically impossible flooding, has appeared before. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly throughout human history. And every single time it appeared, it was preceded by a warning that was ignored. Dubai's skyline, dominated by the Burj Khalifa, stood like a monument to human achievement as the storm rolled in. That tower, the tallest structure ever built by human hands, was struck repeatedly by lightning as the storm raged. And there was something almost poetic about that image, something that felt less like coincidence and more like a statement. The tallest thing humanity ever built, being struck from above, over and over again. Throughout that night, as the storm tightened its grip on the city, residents filmed what they were seeing from their windows. Social media filled with videos of highways turned into rivers, of luxury SUVs floating like toys in a bathtub, of five-star hotels with water pouring through their lobbies. The world watched in stunned silence, and most people asked the same question. How did this happen? But that is the wrong question. The right question, the one that will keep you up at night if you really think about it, is this. Why did this happen to this city at this moment in history? Because when you look at what Dubai represents, when you look at what it has built, what it worships, what it celebrates, the answer to that question becomes something far more uncomfortable than a weather report. And that answer has been written down for thousands of years. But before we get to that answer, you need to understand something about how the world has responded to these kinds of events throughout history. Because the pattern is not what you think it is. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every generation believes it is different. Every civilization that has ever risen to power has looked at its own achievements and concluded the same thing. We are the exception. We have gone further than anyone before us. We have broken through limits that stopped every previous generation. Dubai is the ultimate expression of that belief. Consider what this city actually is. 50 years ago, Dubai was a small fishing village, a collection of mud brick buildings on the edge of a desert creek. The people who lived there survived by diving for pearls and trading along the coast. Life was hard, simple, and entirely at the mercy of the natural world. Then oil was discovered, and everything changed. Within 2 generations, Dubai transformed itself into something the world had never seen. Skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, a ski resort inside a shopping mall in the middle of a desert, the world's largest gold market, man-made islands shaped like palm trees, visible from space. The message Dubai sent to the world was unmistakable. We have conquered nature. We have beaten the desert. We have taken a place where nothing should grow, nothing should thrive, and nothing should survive, and turned it into the most glamorous city on earth. That is an extraordinary achievement. It is also an extraordinarily dangerous attitude, because throughout human history, and every civilization that has reached that peak, that moment of supreme confidence in its own power, has been brought low, not always by war, not always by economic collapse, sometimes by water. Now, in modern Western culture, the idea that a natural disaster could be a divine message has been largely dismissed. Scientists explain floods with atmospheric pressure systems and climate data. Meteorologists talk about jet streams and moisture patterns, and they are not wrong, but they are also not telling the whole story. Because here is something that every major religious tradition on earth agrees on. Whether you follow the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, or any other ancient sacred text, natural events have spiritual meaning. This is not a fringe belief. This is not the opinion of a handful of extremists on the internet. So this is the consistent, unanimous testimony of every civilization that has ever existed on this planet. The ancient Egyptians saw floods as divine judgment. The ancient Greeks believed storms were messages from the gods. The Hebrews understood natural disasters as direct responses to the moral condition of a people. The early Islamic scholars taught that wind and rain were instruments of divine will, capable of being mercy or punishment, depending on the spiritual state of those who received them. Every culture, every continent, every era of human history, they all said the same thing. Nature answers to something higher than itself. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you take that idea seriously, if you allow yourself to even consider that natural events might carry spiritual meaning, then you cannot look at the Dubai flood and simply say, bad weather. You have to ask the harder question. What was God saying? And more importantly, who was he saying it to? Because Dubai is not just a city. Dubai is a symbol. It is the purest expression of what the modern world values most: wealth, power, luxury, human ingenuity untethered from any sense of divine accountability. A city where you can buy a gold-plated sports car. A city where artificial islands were literally constructed to reshape the geography of the earth. A city that has positioned itself as the playground of the global elite. A place where the super-rich come to display their wealth without apology. And on one April night, all of it went underwater. Now, consider this. The book of Jeremiah, written more than 2,500 years ago, contains a passage that reads like a weather report for our current moment. It speaks of a storm, not just any storm, a whirling tempest, a storm of wrath that bursts upon the heads of the wicked. Jeremiah wrote those words to a people who had been warned, a people who had been given every opportunity to change course, a people who had listened to false voices, telling them that everything was fine, that judgment was not coming, that they were safe. And then the storm came. The false prophets of Jeremiah's time had one consistent message: nothing will happen to you. Everything will be okay. Sound familiar? Because that is exactly what the climate scientists and meteorologists were saying about Dubai just days before the flood. Everything is fine. This is a desert city. It barely rains here. And then the sky opened. But here is what you need to understand. Jeremiah was not writing about weather. He was writing about something far more powerful, far more terrifying, and far more relevant to where we are right now than most people are willing to admit. He was writing about a pattern that has repeated itself throughout all of human history. And that pattern is about to change everything you thought you knew about what happened in Dubai. Because the storm that hit Dubai was not the first of its kind. And if history is any guide, it will not be the last. But what comes next in this pattern is the part nobody wants to talk about. Open any Bible, turn to almost any book, and somewhere in those pages, you will find the same warning repeated in different words, different languages, different centuries. God warns before he acts. This is not a minor theological footnote. This is one of the most consistent patterns in all of Scripture. Before the flood of Noah, God gave a warning. Before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, God gave a warning. Before the plagues fell on Egypt, God gave a warning. Before Jerusalem was destroyed, God gave a warning. Every single time, a warning came first. So the question for our moment, for this generation, for this country, for every person watching this right now, is not whether God warns. The question is whether we are listening. And the book of Romans lays it out with a clarity that is almost uncomfortable to read. Chapter 1, verse 18 says this: "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness." Read that again slowly. The wrath of God is being revealed. Present tense, active tense, not future, not theoretical, not something that only happened to ancient civilizations thousands of years ago. Now, the wrath of God is being revealed right now, in real time, against a world that has taken the truth about God and buried it under layers of wealth, technology, entertainment, and pride. Does that description remind you of any city you know? A city of gold? A city of artificial islands? A city that built a ski resort in the desert just because it could? Romans chapter 2, verse 5 goes even further. It says, "Because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed." Storing up wrath. That phrase is haunting when you think about it carefully. It means that every act of defiance against God is not forgotten. It is not simply overlooked because time passes. It accumulates. It builds like water behind a dam. And eventually, the dam breaks. Now some people will hear this and immediately push back. They will say that God is love. They will say that a loving God would never pour out wrath on a city. They will say that connecting a flood to divine judgment is primitive thinking. But here is what those people are missing. The wrath of God and the love of God are not opposites. They flow from the exact same source. They are both expressions of the same perfect justice. Think about it this way. When a judge sentences a violent criminal to prison, is that judge acting with love or with wrath? The answer is both. Love for the victims who deserve justice. Wrath toward the crime that violated innocent people. God operates on the same principle. His wrath is not the rage of an unstable tyrant. His wrath is the righteous response of a perfect judge to the violation of his perfect law. And his law has been violated, massively, repeatedly, without apology. Now look at what the Gospel of John says about this. chapter 3, verse 36. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life, but whoever rejects the Son will not see life. For God's wrath remains on them. Notice that word, remains, not arrives, not descends, not falls, remains. It is already there. It is already present. The default condition of a life lived in rejection of God is not neutrality. It is not safety. It is the continuous, ongoing presence of divine wrath. The flood in Dubai did not come from nowhere. It came from somewhere, from something, from a pattern of divine response that has been documented, recorded, and warned about for thousands of years. But now, here is where this gets even more serious. Because the Bible does not just warn about wrath, it also explains exactly how that wrath works, how it builds, what triggers it, what it looks like in different stages. And the stage we appear to be in right now is perhaps the most dangerous one. The Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Rome, describes 3 moments in Romans chapter 1, where God responds to human rejection with the same devastating phrase. God gave them over. First, when humanity rejected the truth about God, He gave them over to sexual impurity. Then, when they continued to reject Him, He gave them over to shameful lusts. Then, when they persisted in rebellion, He gave them over to a depraved mind. God gave them over. Do you understand what that means? It does not mean God sent lightning bolts from heaven. It does not mean an earthquake swallowed a city overnight. It means something far more terrifying. It means God stopped intervening. He withdrew His hand of protection and said, "You want to live without me? Then live without me, and face what life without me actually looks like." That is the passive wrath of God, and it is the most devastating form of judgment that exists. Because when God actively strikes a city, there is at least the possibility of recognition, at least the possibility that people will look up, see the hand of God, and turn back. But when God withdraws His protection silently, nobody even notices it is happening. The nation continues on. The city continues to build. The people continue to chase wealth and pleasure and achievement. And all the while, something has been quietly removed from above them. Something they did not even know was there, until it was gone. Now connect that to what happened in Dubai, a city that has spent decades building itself into the global capital of wealth and luxury. A city that has constructed artificial realities, indoor ski slopes, underwater hotels, gold vending machines, as if to say, we do not need the natural world. We have made our own. A city where, by multiple accounts, the pursuit of wealth has become the singular, defining religion. And on one April night, the protection that had held that desert city in a stable, sunny, predictable climate for decades failed. Was it simply bad weather? Or was it something being quietly, sovereignly withdrawn? The prophet Jeremiah would know exactly what to call it, and he already did. Over 2,500 years ago, he wrote about false prophets who told the people not to worry, who assured them that peace was coming, who dismissed the warnings of judgment as exaggeration. Jeremiah called them liars, not because they were deliberately deceiving people, but because they were telling people what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to hear. And the storm came anyway. Now here is the part that will stop you cold. Because Jeremiah was not just writing about his own generation. He was writing about every generation that would follow the same pattern. And the pattern is happening right now. But the Bible is not the only ancient text that saw this coming, because there is another book, written centuries after Jeremiah, that describes this pattern in even more specific, even more chilling detail. And what it says about the cities that ignored the warnings will change the way you see what is happening in the world right now. The Quran was revealed in the 7th century, but the stories it tells are far older than that. And they are stories of civilizations that rose to extraordinary power, cities that built monuments to their own greatness, peoples who were given every advantage, wealth, strength, intelligence, resources, and who used those advantages to declare their independence from the God who gave them. And then they were erased, not gradually, not slowly, not through the long, slow decline that historians usually trace. Suddenly, completely, with a finality that left nothing behind but ruins in the sand. The Quran speaks of a people called Ad, a civilization of extraordinary power. Their leader, a man named Hud, was sent to warn them. He told them plainly, "Turn back to God. Stop your arrogance. Acknowledge that the power you have was given to you, not earned by you." They refused. They mocked the warning. They dismissed Hud. And they pointed to their own strength and said, "Who is more powerful than us?" And then the wind came. Not a gentle wind, not an uncomfortable wind. The Quran describes it as a screaming wind, a wind that raged against them for 7 nights and 8 days without stopping. A wind sent during days of misfortune to make them taste the punishment of disgrace. 7 nights and 8 days, an entire civilization gone. Then there was the people of Thamud, a different civilization, a different era, but the same pattern. They were given a sign, a miraculous sign, a she-camel sent as a direct message from God, a living proof that He was real, that He was watching, and that He was offering them one final opportunity to change. They killed it, deliberately, defiantly, as an act of collective rejection. The Quran records what happened next, with devastating economy of words. The thunderbolt of humiliating punishment seized them for what they used to earn. A thunderbolt, an entire people, gone. Now read those stories again and notice something. In both cases, Ad and Thamud, there were 2 things present before the destruction came: a warning and a rejection of that warning. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern, a deliberate, consistent, divinely structured pattern that the Quran presents not as ancient history, but as timeless instruction. These stories are not in the Quran so that readers can feel superior to people who lived thousands of years ago. They are there as a mirror. They are there so that every generation can look at those stories and ask, does this look familiar? Does the arrogance of Ad look familiar? Does the defiance of Thamud look familiar? A city that builds the tallest tower on earth, a city that reshapes the ocean floor to create artificial land, a city that essentially says, through its every construction and creation, look what we have done, look how powerful we are, look how far human hands can reach, who is more powerful than us? Sound familiar? Now, the Quran also introduces a concept that is critical for understanding what happened in Dubai, a concept that divides divine punishment into 2 distinct categories. The first is partial punishment. Partial punishment is not designed to destroy. It is designed to wake people up, to shake them out of complacency, to create enough disruption and discomfort that they stop, look up, and reconsider the direction they are heading. And the story of Pharaoh is the clearest example of this. When Moses brought God's message to Pharaoh and was rejected, God did not immediately send the final destruction. Instead, He sent a series of partial punishments: flood, locusts, lice, frogs, blood in the water. Each one was severe enough to get attention. Each one was specific enough to be unmistakably supernatural. And each time, Pharaoh responded the same way. He called for Moses. He promised to change. He said, "Take away this punishment, and we will follow God." And the moment the punishment lifted, he broke his word. Every single time. The Quran records this pattern with a precision that is almost painful to read. When we removed from them the punishment, at once they broke their word. At once. Not gradually, not after some period of reflection. At the moment the pressure lifted, they went straight back to what they had been doing. Does that pattern sound familiar in our world today? Think about how humanity has responded to the COVID pandemic. During those months of lockdown, churches filled online. Prayer surged. People across every religious tradition reported a sudden, desperate return to God. Questions about mortality and meaning exploded across search engines worldwide. And then the vaccines came. The restrictions lifted. The economy reopened. And the moment the pressure lifted, at once, the churches emptied again. The prayer surged, receded. The questions about meaning were replaced by questions about stock prices and vacation plans. at once. The pattern of Pharaoh is not ancient history, it is human nature. And the Quran is very clear about what comes after partial punishment is repeatedly ignored. The final punishment. The Quran says this about the purpose of the final punishment: even if they were returned to the earth and retested, they would still not change. That is an extraordinary statement. It means that when God sends a final punishment, it is not arbitrary. It is not impulsive. It is the conclusion of a long process in which every possible opportunity for change has been exhausted, every warning given, every partial punishment sent, every door of repentance left open. And when a people have demonstrated, conclusively, irrefutably, that they will not change no matter what, the test ends. Now here is the question that matters. Which category does Dubai fall into? Is this flood a partial punishment? A warning shot? A divine disruption designed to create enough discomfort that people stop and reconsider? Or is it the beginning of something final? The honest answer is, nobody knows. But history tells us that the difference between the two categories depends almost entirely on one thing. What happens next? Does the city that was flooded respond with reflection, humility, and a genuine questioning of its values and priorities? Or does it pump out the water, rebuild the tunnels, repair the roads, and go straight back to business as usual? Because if history is any guide, the answer to that question will determine what comes next. And what comes next is the part of this story that should concern every single person watching this right now. Not just in Dubai, in America. Because the pattern does not stop with ancient civilizations. And it does not stop with Dubai. There is a reason these same signs, floods, fires, storms of impossible intensity, are appearing simultaneously across the most powerful nation on Earth. And what that reason is will connect everything you have heard so far into one picture that is impossible to ignore. There is a thread that runs through all of human history. It is not taught in schools. It is not covered in history textbooks. It does not appear in the analysis of political scientists or economists, but it is there, running through every great civilization that has ever risen and fallen, visible if you know what to look for. The thread looks like this. A civilization rises. It accumulates power and wealth beyond anything its ancestors could have imagined. It builds monuments to its own greatness. Here it begins to believe that its prosperity is the result of its own genius, rather than divine favor. It starts to push God to the margins, first quietly, then openly, then aggressively. Warnings come, they are ignored. More warnings come, they are dismissed. And then something happens that cannot be explained by politics or economics or military strategy. The civilization falls, and the fall is always sudden, always disproportionate to whatever triggered it, always leaving historians scratching their heads and saying, "We cannot fully explain how something so powerful collapsed so completely, so fast." They cannot explain it because they are not looking at the right variable. Let's go back to the beginning. Noah. The story of Noah is perhaps the most well-known account of divine judgment in all of human history. And every major religious tradition contains a version of this story. The Bible, the Quran, ancient Mesopotamian texts, Hindu scriptures, they all record a time when a catastrophic flood was sent to judge a civilization that had become irredeemably corrupt. But here is what most people miss about the story of Noah. The flood did not come without warning. Noah spent decades, some traditions say over 100 years, building an ark in the middle of dry land, in full public view, while the people around him watched, mocked, and went back to their business. Every day that ark existed was a warning. Every day someone walked past that construction site and laughed was a day they chose to reject the message. And when the rain finally started, it was too late. The window of opportunity had closed. Now move forward in history to Sodom and Gomorrah. Two cities, wealthy, powerful, located in what was then one of the most fertile and prosperous regions of the ancient world. Cities that had become so thoroughly corrupted that their very names became permanent shorthand for moral collapse. Before God destroyed them, He sent messengers. Abraham himself interceded, pleading with God to spare the cities if even 10 righteous people could be found there. 10. Out of an entire city. God agreed to spare the cities for 10 people. They could not find 10. And the next morning, the cities were gone. Fire and brimstone. An act of judgment so complete and so thorough that the geographic region where those cities stood is still one of the most desolate places on earth today. This is not mythology. This is history. And then there is the Tower of Babel, a project of extraordinary human ambition. A tower designed to reach the heavens, built by a unified humanity that had decided it no longer needed to depend on God. Built as a monument to human self-sufficiency. The judgment that came was not fire or flood. It was confusion. God scattered the builders, disrupted their communication, turned their greatest strength, their unity, into chaos. And the project that was supposed to demonstrate human supremacy over the divine became a symbol of human limitation. Now look at that list. Noah's generation. Moral corruption beyond recovery, destroyed by water. Sodom and Gomorrah. Sexual and social corruption beyond recovery, destroyed by fire. The Tower of Babel. Prideful self-sufficiency beyond recovery, scattered by confusion. In 3 different civilizations, 3 different sins, 3 different forms of judgment, but the same pattern running through all of them. Rise, corruption, warning, rejection, judgment, every time, without exception. Now, here is where the pattern becomes deeply personal. Because this same pattern did not end with ancient civilizations, it continued through the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. Every great power in human history has eventually encountered this same sequence. Rise, corruption, warning, rejection, judgment. And here is the question that should be keeping every American awake at night. Where is the United States in that sequence? Consider the facts soberly. America was founded explicitly in its founding documents on the recognition of divine authority. The Declaration of Independence invokes the Creator as the source of human rights. The currency carries the motto, "In God we trust." The founding generation understood, almost universally, that the prosperity of the nation depended on its relationship with God. That understanding has been systematically dismantled, not overnight, not in a single dramatic moment, but steadily, incrementally, over decades. Prayer removed from schools, the acknowledgement of God removed from public life, biblical values dismissed as primitive and replaced with a shifting, subjective moral framework that changes based on cultural preference. And simultaneously, as if on cue, the warning signs have escalated. Hurricane Harvey dumped more rain on Houston than any storm in recorded American history. Hurricane Irma was so powerful, it sucked the water away from the shore before it arrived. Hurricane Maria erased entire communities in Puerto Rico. The wildfires that swept through California consumed more land than some entire countries. The tornadoes, the ice storms, the flooding events that are breaking records every single year. Are these just weather patterns, or is something being withdrawn? Because here is what the biblical framework of passive wrath would predict. It would not predict dramatic, obvious, undeniable acts of divine anger. It would predict something much quieter, much more gradual, a slow withdrawal of protection, an incremental removal of the invisible hand that has held catastrophe at bay, a gradual handing over of a nation to the consequences of its own choices. And what does that look like from the inside? It looks like weather getting worse every decade. It looks like social cohesion breaking down. It looks like institutions that used to hold the culture together slowly losing their authority and their integrity. It looks like a society that is visibly, measurably fraying at the edges while its leaders insist that everything is fine. It looks exactly like what is happening in America right now. Now, some people will respond to all of this by saying, you are just cherry-picking bad events and calling them judgment. Terrible things have always happened. This is nothing new, and that objection deserves a serious response, because they are right that terrible things have always happened. But they are wrong about what has changed. What has changed is the intensity. What has changed is the frequency. What has changed is the geographic concentration of disaster in a nation that has spent 60 years systematically removing God from its public life. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "When your judgments come upon the earth, the people of the world learn righteousness." The judgments are coming upon the earth. The question is whether the people of the world, whether the people of this nation, are learning anything, or whether, like Pharaoh, the moment the pressure lifts, we go straight back to what we were doing. But here is the part of this story that changes everything, because there is a reason that New Testament judgment looks different from Old Testament judgment. There is a reason that God does not simply destroy the way He once did. And that reason is a single event that changed the entire relationship between God and human history. And if you do not understand this event, you cannot understand anything that is happening right now. There is one word that sits at the center of everything, one word that separates the way God dealt with human sin before a certain moment in history from the way He deals with it now. That word is propitiation. It is not a common word. You will not hear it in casual conversation. But it may be the most important word in the entire Bible when it comes to understanding why God has not simply destroyed the modern world the way He destroyed Sodom, or drowned civilization the way He did in Noah's time. Propitiation means the complete satisfaction of wrath through an acceptable sacrifice. In other words, the penalty has been paid, the wrath has been absorbed, the justice has been fulfilled, just not by the people who deserve to pay it. Here is what happened. Roughly 2,000 years ago, on a hill outside Jerusalem, a man named Jesus of Nazareth was executed by Roman crucifixion. From a purely historical standpoint, this was not an unusual event. Rome crucified thousands of people. But what happened at that cross was not an ordinary execution. According to the Scriptures, according to the testimony of eyewitnesses who staked their lives on the truth of what they saw, something happened at that cross that had never happened before and will never happen again. God poured out every drop of His wrath against human sin onto one person. The book of Isaiah, written more than 700 years before the crucifixion, describes it with an accuracy that should stop every skeptic cold. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was placed on Him, and the Lord laid on Him the iniquity of us all. Every act of defiance against God, every moral failure of every human being who has ever lived, every sin of every civilization throughout all of history, all of it, placed on one person, judged in one moment, paid in full. This is what propitiation means. The dam that had been building throughout all of human history, the accumulation of divine wrath against the constant, relentless rebellion of humanity, was released, not onto civilization, not onto a city, not onto the earth, onto Christ. And this changes everything about how we understand God's response to sin in our current moment. Because of the cross, God is not operating on the same terms He used in the Old Testament. He is not sending fire from heaven to consume cities. He is not opening the ground to swallow the rebellious. He is not releasing plagues to punish the defiant. He is doing something far more patient, far more merciful. He is waiting. The Apostle Peter explains it this way: "The Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance, not wanting anyone to perish, even now, even after everything, even in a world that has rejected Him as comprehensively as our world has. God is still waiting, still offering the same choice He has always offered. Accept Christ as your substitute. Accept that He took your wrath, paid your penalty, satisfied your judgment, and walk free. Or reject that offer and face the wrath yourself. One way or the other, the justice of God will be fulfilled. That is non-negotiable. It is woven into the fabric of a morally ordered universe. Sin will be judged. The only question is, who absorbs that judgment? Christ already absorbed it for everyone who places their faith in Him. For everyone who rejects that offer, The wrath remains. Remember that word from John chapter 3? Remains. It does not fall. It does not arrive. It is already there. The default condition of a life lived apart from Christ is not safety. It is not neutrality. It is the continuous presence of unresolved divine wrath, a building like water behind a cracking dam. Now here is where this connects directly to what happened in Dubai, and directly to what is happening in America. The cross did not eliminate the consequences of national sin. It eliminated the eternal consequences for individuals who receive it by faith. But nations do not stand before the cross the way individuals do. Nations do not receive salvation. Nations do not place their faith in Christ. Nations experience the consequences of their collective choices. And when a nation's collective choices move consistently, deliberately, and increasingly away from God, the passive wrath begins. The protection withdraws. The hand that held the storms at bay lifts, and the storms come. This is not a contradiction of the cross. This is not God going back on his promises. This is the same God who demonstrated his love by sending Christ, also demonstrating his justice by refusing to endlessly protect those who have collectively decided they do not want him. He respects the choice. He gives people what they have asked for: a life, a nation without God. And what that actually looks like is not the peaceful, enlightened, self-sufficient existence that secular culture has promised. It looks like Dubai underwater. It looks like American cities consumed by fire. It looks like a society that has every material advantage in human history and cannot, despite all of it, find peace, stability, or a reason to get out of bed in the morning. This is the passive wrath of God, quiet, invisible, devastating, and deeply personal. Because while nations experience the collective consequences of their choices, individuals within those nations still have a choice to make, the same choice that has always been available, the same offer that was made at the cross. And here is the extraordinary thing about that offer. It does not require you to be good enough. It does not require you to have a perfect record. It does not require you to have never participated in the collective sin of your generation. It only requires one thing: faith. Belief that Christ took your place, that the wrath that was yours was transferred to him, that the penalty has been paid, and the door is open. That is it. That is the offer. And it is still open, right now, today. But here is what nobody tells you about that offer. It has an expiration date, not a date on a calendar, not a specific moment that God has announced in advance, but a moment that is different for every person. The moment when the offer closes. And no one knows when that moment comes, which is exactly why what is happening right now, in Dubai, in America, across the entire world, matters so urgently. Because the signs that the window is narrowing are not subtle. They are not hidden. They are not things that require special knowledge to recognize. They are playing out on the news every single day. And once you understand what you are actually looking at, let's talk about America. Not abstractly, not theoretically, specifically, concretely, with the kind of directness that this moment demands. Because while Dubai flooding is dramatic and newsworthy, Dubai is not the nation that was built on a covenant with God. And Dubai is not the nation whose founding documents explicitly acknowledge the Creator as the source of human rights and dignity. America is. And that changes everything about how God's judgment applies. The Bible is very clear that greater knowledge brings greater responsibility. The nation that was given the most light will be held to the highest standard when it chooses to walk away from that light. America was given extraordinary light. The pilgrims who landed on these shores came explicitly seeking religious freedom, the freedom to worship God according to their conscience. The founders who built the framework of this republic drew explicitly from biblical principles of natural law, human dignity, and divine accountability. For generations, the prosperity of this nation was understood, even by its secular leaders, to be connected to its relationship with God. That connection has been severed, not by a single dramatic act, but by 1,000 small decisions made over decades, each one moving the nation incrementally further from the foundation on which it was built. And now consider what has happened to the weather. In 2017 alone, the United States experienced a sequence of natural disasters that broke virtually every historical record in the books. Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas in late August of that year. By the time it was done, it had dumped more rain on a single location than any storm in the recorded history of the continental United States. Houston, the fourth largest city in America, was underwater. Tens of thousands of homes destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people displaced. The meteorologists were stunned. They ran out of colors on their rainfall charts. They had to add new colors because the levels of rainfall exceeded anything the charts had been designed to measure. Before the Houston floodwaters had even receded, Hurricane Irma was forming in the Atlantic. Irma became one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded. Maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. A storm so large it covered the entire state of Florida. A storm so powerful that it sucked the water away from the shores of the Bahamas before it arrived, leaving the ocean floor exposed, as if the sea itself was retreating from what was coming. And behind Irma came Jose, and behind Jose came Maria. Maria hit Puerto Rico with a force that effectively destroyed the island's infrastructure. 18 months after the storm, tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans were still without reliable power. Simultaneously, on the other side of the country, wildfires were consuming California at a pace that had no historical precedent. Entire communities erased in hours. Wine country, residential neighborhoods, forests that had stood for centuries, all in the same season, all in the same nation. Now hold that picture in your mind, and then ask the question that the secular media will not ask. Is this normal? Not statistically normal? The statistics already tell us it is not normal. The records being broken tell us it is not normal. Is it spiritually normal? Or is this what a nation looks like when it is operating under divine blessing and protection? Or is this what a nation looks like when that protection has begun to be withdrawn? Because here is what the biblical framework of passive wrath would predict for a nation in America's position. It would not predict a sudden, obvious, undeniable act of divine anger. It would predict weather that gets incrementally worse, disasters that break records with increasing regularity, events that, taken individually, can always be explained by natural causes, but taken together, form a pattern that science cannot fully account for. It would predict exactly what we are seeing. Now, some will say, the climate is changing. These are the results of climate change. This is a scientific problem, not a spiritual one. And again, where the honest response is, both things can be true simultaneously. God works through natural processes. He always has. He sent the flood of Noah through rain. He parted the Red Sea through wind. He sent the plagues through natural agents. The mechanism does not eliminate the message. Climate change and divine judgment are not mutually exclusive. The same God who created the climate is fully capable of using its disruption as an instrument of his purposes. The question is not what natural mechanism is producing these storms. The question is, who is directing that mechanism, and why? And if the answer to that question aligns with a pattern that has repeated consistently throughout all of human history, then the response that is called for is not a better environmental policy. It is repentance. Now, let's be specific about what repentance looks like for a nation. It is not a political movement. It is not a legislative agenda. It is not a return to some idealized version of the 1950s. It is a collective, humble acknowledgement that this nation has moved away from the God who blessed it, and a genuine, individual decision to return, not as a national policy, but as a personal choice. Because while God may judge nations collectively, He redeems people individually. And this is where the message of the Dubai flood becomes deeply, personally urgent for every person watching this right now. You cannot control what America does. You cannot reverse the cultural trajectory of a nation by yourself, but you can make a choice. The same choice that has always been available. The same choice that was made available at the cross. to step out from under the wrath that remains and into the protection of the one who already absorbed it. But here is what makes this moment different from every other moment in history. The signs that we are approaching something significant are escalating faster than at any previous point in recorded history. The frequency of record-breaking disasters is increasing. The moral collapse of Western civilization is accelerating. The rejection of God in the public square is becoming more aggressive, more systematic, and more comprehensive. And according to every biblical pattern we have examined today, these are not random events. They are mile markers, signs on a road that is heading somewhere specific. Now, most people, even most religious people, look at these signs and think, this is concerning, and I should probably take this more seriously. I will deal with this eventually. Eventually. That word has ended more lives without resolution than any other word in the human language. The people of Noah's generation had eventually. The residents of Sodom had eventually. The civilization of Ad had eventually. Pharaoh had eventually. They all thought there was more time. There was not. And here is the chilling reality of our current moment. The same God who is patient, who is described in Scripture as long-suffering and slow to anger, is also the God who set the boundaries of human history, who knows the end from the beginning, who has already determined the moment when patience gives way to judgment. That moment is not announced in advance. It simply arrives. And when it does, the same thing that happened in Dubai will happen on a scale that makes the Dubai flood look like a puddle. Not because God is cruel, because God is just. And justice, when it finally arrives after being delayed by extraordinary patience and mercy, does not arrive quietly. The book of Revelation describes a series of final judgments that make every disaster in human history look like a rehearsal. Seas turning, stars falling, the entire structure of the natural world being shaken to its foundations. These are not metaphors, they are promises, and the only people who will stand in that moment without terror are the people who made their choice before it arrived. The people who looked at the warning signs, the floods, the fires, the storms of impossible intensity, and instead of explaining them away, asked the harder question and found the harder answer and did something about it. There is one more thing that needs to be said, one more piece of this picture that changes everything about how you should respond to what you have heard today. Because it is not enough to recognize the pattern. It is not enough to see the warning signs. History is full of people who saw exactly what was coming and still did nothing. And what separated those who survived from those who did not was not information. It was a decision, and that decision is still available right now. But based on everything we have examined today, every pattern, every precedent, every sign that is currently playing out across the globe, the window for that decision is not as wide as it used to be.